All right, we're going. So welcome everyone. I am Stephen from the Skeptical Agnostic, and I'm joined by the one and the only Dr. Alex Malpass. He's fresh off of his debate with William Lane Craig. If you don't know about Dr. Alex Malpass, I don't know what rock you've been hiding under. He has a whole list of accomplishments. He was the first person, well, he was the person who split the atom. He was the first person to set foot on the moon. He is the reason that the Beatles broke up, and I believe he's the only person on Earth who has mastered the 5-point palm exploding heart technique. So did I miss anything, Alex?
No, that's it. All of those things are definitely true. Yeah.
All right, good. You've lived a long life.
I look like I have at the moment because I need to shave, but I just neglected my shaving routine for a while. I've been thinking about maybe just having a big beard. See how long my wife
should, man. That's what philosophers are supposed to have. Mine, if I grow it out, it gets all stringy, so it just doesn't look good on me. But it looks like you could pull it off. So that's what you need to do, man. That's what philosophers do.
See how long it takes for my wife to tell me that it's not acceptable and that it has to go.
That's right. My wife would tell me the same thing, but I would just, when I had a long beard, I kept it. But then when I look back at pictures, I'm like, I don't know why I thought that looked good. So I just keep it nice and short here. But no, you're good, man. So I just want to say I came across you when I was still a Christian and I was arguing against presuppositionalists. I think maybe one of the first videos I came across was the 2 discussions you had with Matt Slick way back when. And then probably your discussion. Well, you also had 2 discussions with Jimmy Stevens. And some people know this about me, but when I was a Christian, my father-in-law became a presup. And so me and him would have discussions back and forth regarding evidential apologetics and presuppositional apologetics. So I vehemently oppose presuppositional apologetics, and so that's kind of how I came to know of your work. So I mean, I guess I'm interested because it's been a long time that you've been discussing presuppositional apologetics, and yet every now and then you still, just like this video, you're still interested in discussing it. Why do you feel drawn to such an irrational world?
Well, I mean, to some extent, it's not the sort of thing I've done like academic philosophy work, published papers and that type of thing. And that's not on this type of stuff. That's just more mainstream, like metaphysics, and like I've published a bunch of papers on the Kalam and on the Grim Reaper paradox, and my PhD work was in temporal logic and that type of thing. So just sort of mainstream analytic philosophy stuff. This presuppositionalist stuff it's kind of like I don't know, it's sort of recreational philosophy, right? I mean, it's not so much interesting because the philosophical stuff is genuinely interesting. It's more interesting because it's like, well, I think when I first got into the Matt Slick stuff, it was like I hadn't really realized the sort of online confrontational debating style with philosophy, because that's not how it's done in academia. People write papers and they discuss things, but everyone's very cordial and nice, or at least they are in the UK and in Europe where I was doing it. Maybe it's an American thing. Maybe it's a sort of evangelical standing on the street corner and saying, you know, prove me wrong, God exists and you know it, or something like that. I don't know.
Very well might be.
That's sort of, I found it fascinating that people were using philosophy to sort of punch each other rhetorically with, right? And listening to, I don't know how I stumbled across, I think, actually, I can remember stumbling across the Sye Ten Bruggencate video. It must have been in like 2013 or something, absolutely ages ago now.
Yeah.
And being like, what the hell? What is going on with this? And you know, some internet atheist guy getting caught in circles and not understanding what was going on. And to be honest, Bruggencate made this chap look like an absolute fool. I mean, he didn't have the answers. He didn't know what was happening. He was used to saying stuff about science and biology and this type of thing. And Sye Ten was talking about epistemology and like the metaphysics of logic and stuff. And it was like, hold on, this is like, I know more about this certainly than the atheist guy who knew nothing about it. But also it's quite obvious that Sye Ten didn't really know anything about epistemology or metaphysics, and he would slide between this different views on the same topic and misunderstand it, veer from metaphysics into epistemology without realizing and stuff like this. So that encouraged me to think that I could. That it was a sort of like, it was like a big mess, like a messy room that you want to just come in and get a broom out and start cleaning it up or something. Like
that's a good analogy.
Yeah, so it's something like that. I think it's just a sort of recreation. It's like doing a Sudoku or something. You just want to complete it and get it all done.
Yeah.
So it's that's my interest in it, I think.
Yeah, and I think look, precepts are really good at, if they're taking on someone that doesn't know much about epistemology, they're really good at cornering them. I mean, despite the fact that their understanding of epistemology a lot of times leaves a little bit to be desired. But yeah, I mean, they're good with their rhetoric as well. But yeah, I don't know. There's just something about precepts that a lot of them are just very much in your face, as we're going to see in some of these videos. But yeah, it's just something about their ilk that they just tend to be a little bit more chest thumping and self-aggrandizing than just normal.
For sure. Yeah. They're like, it's macho man philosophy, street fighting, right? There are no women presuppositional apologists. Like, there aren't any. I've never seen that. And
I haven't either.
Like 15 years of listening to these idiots talking. They're all men, and they are the worst behaved, like, debaters. You know, you get people like Jim Bob. I think we're going to watch a Jim Bob clip later, but he's the type of person that will just like be, oh, you retard, you fucking idiot, blah blah. And it's like, why are you being so childish? Like, one minute you want to talk about like metaphysics, and then the next minute you're calling me a retard. Like, it's just a weird combination, you know.
Well, what's interesting is I've seen him do that mostly when he's commenting on someone else's work, but when he's not in front of them. But normally when he's in front of someone, he behaves himself, which is strange. Like, just behave yourself, you know, all the time. Like, but yeah, I mean, that's just something we tend to see from the Phil bros, as they call them. But
there's some crossover with like a sort of toxic masculinity influences and presuppositional apologetics, I think.
Yeah, and I think that that's actually gotten worse over the past couple years, because even back in the day with like Matt Slick and Darth Dawkins, like I even Matt Slick sometimes could be a little bit confrontational, but nowhere near like Sye or Jay Dyer or, like you said, Jim Bob, where it's really petulant and it's really just like adolescent behavior. But anyways, yeah, so I guess we're going to see some of that a little bit. But all right, so what we have is just some various clips from various different precept apologists. We wanted to make it kind of eclectic so we could survey not just different arguments, but just the different styles, I guess, that you get from different precepts. So I think we'll just go ahead and start. I wanted to start first and foremost with, he's not the godfather of precept, but he's very close to it. I guess you could call Van Til, or I guess if you really wanted to push it back, you could call like Kant. But although Kant never argued for like Christian presuppositionalism, but I know a lot of them find their roots in a type of Kantian transcendental type of argumentation. But yeah, I think Van Til was the one who really started it, and Greg Bahnsen was his. I think Greg Bahnsen actually studied under Van Til and was kind of like his pupil. So
that's true.
So I guess we'll start with some Greg Bahnsen. Does that sound good?
Yeah, that sounds good. I think Bahnsen studied under Van Til. I think he got his like his equivalent of his master's degree under Van Til. But then I think he went to like Berkeley or Stanford or some just normal mainstream university where he got his PhD in philosophy.
I don't know where he got his PhD, but yeah, and I mean his whole book. What is it? Van Til's Apologetic. It's like that 700-page book, I think.
It's up on the shelf somewhere behind me.
Yeah, mine's somewhere over there as well. But yeah, I mean that's, I think, probably one of the big go-tos for precepts. But all right, let's go ahead and take a look. So what we're going to be doing for everybody watching, we're not going to watch all of these clips. We're not going to watch them from beginning to end. I think we're just going to look at some parts that are where they're making the relevant type of arguments for the precept worldview. So yeah, we'll start with good old Greg Bahnsen. And I think we're going to start this clip at around 1:11. So, all right, let's do it.
And I'm going to argue.
I'm sorry. So, Alex, if I might stop it at some point when I want to say something, but if you want me to stop it at any point, if he says something that you don't want to let him get away with, any of these precept apologists, just let me know and I'll stop it. I'm not going to watch it the whole way through, but I will stop at a point where I think maybe we should comment on what he says.
Yeah, when it becomes too much for me, I'll let you know.
Okay. All right.
And I'm going to argue now for the impossibility of the contrary. That is, within my worldview, I can explain to you why there is logic. In my worldview, I can explain to you why there is causality. In my worldview, I can explain to you why there are moral absolutes, why I believe that human beings are free and have dignity. But in your worldview,
so already, like, this is one of the big things I see precepts do a lot, which is they'll say something like, we're going to demonstrate the impossibility of the contrary, which to me means we're going to demonstrate that the Christian worldview is necessary for X, whatever they want to say the transcendentals or the preconditions are. But then all they do is list how their worldview is supposedly sufficient, right? Like, all he did was say, okay, I'm going to demonstrate the impossibility of the contrary. And then he starts rattling off how the Christian worldview is, or how God is supposedly sufficient for having knowledge or ethics and so on and so forth.
Yeah. It's just a story that he can tell where on his worldview, I mean, I already find it's quite annoying to have to go along with it.
Worldview, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, on his worldview, I mean, the whole worldview thing, like, everybody's got a worldview, and, you know, you're supposed to have this, like, what does it mean to have a worldview, right? Does it mean you've got a fully worked out systematic philosophy, an account of ethics, an account of metaphysics, you know, as if, like, your worldview is supposed to have some answer to, like, the metaphysical nature of what logic is? It's the most obscure question you can possibly imagine, right? Like, almost nobody has a well worked out view on what that is. Right? I know a philosopher friend of mine, his PhD was on the metaphysics of logic, and, like, yeah, sure, he's got a view, right? But this is what happens when you do a PhD. You find that you just start, like, sort of realizing how uncertain everything really is.
Yeah.
Right? You just plumb the depths of the question until you get to the point where you're like, oh yeah, actually, no one really knows anything about this, right? But you know, but some, like, random douchebag internet atheist guy in Discord will get ambushed by someone running this sort of line, and he's expected to, you know, trot out a completely coherent account of what the metaphysics of logic is. Otherwise, you know, his worldview is supposedly deficient in some way. But really, all Bahnsen's doing is saying something like he's got a story he can tell about logic. But, you know, what we'll find probably with all of these guys is they'll tell you kind of a story about it, but really what they want to do, they don't really want to tell you about Christianity, right? They hardly ever talk about, maybe they do when they're preaching or something, but the presuppositional methodology is an attack. It's just to attack the other guy's view. And then very like cursory kind of like, oh, and on our view, God says logic is real or something. And that's like it. You basically don't get a chance to interrogate it. There's never any kind of acknowledgement that their view might have questions or whatever. It's so he's just going to tell a story very briefly about what his worldview says. And often they have this kind of laundry list of things, you know, that come out of seemingly nowhere, of just like, you've got to say something about morality, induction, like, you know, laws of logic, whatever. And it's like, where did that come from? You know, does philosophy just start with a sort of laundry list that just pops out of the ether, and you just have to go through them one by one? Because you might think that that's the sort of thing you could question as part of philosophy. Like, are these things the starting point? Do I need to answer those questions, right? Like, why can't some view about social justice or something be the starting point for you? Like, one of the questions that you answer, maybe you're not interested in the metaphysics of logic. Like, these are just really, they're just like plucked out of Greg Bahnsen has a PhD in philosophy, and he's debating people who don't. Right? They typically, you know, the famous one is his debate against this guy Stein.
Gordon Stein.
Gordon Stein, right?
Yeah.
Who's a biologist,
Right.
and so it's like your typical sort of Richard Dawkins or whatever kind of science bro, whatever. And he just doesn't know anything about philosophy. So Bahnsen is just using philosophical questions as a way of disarming him and attacking him. And that's the whole precept. Like, they're all of the guys we're going to listen to are just like cosplaying Bahnsen versus Stein for a living in some cases. Right? Yeah.
Yeah. And I think what they do, as we're going to see over and over through these videos, is just like you said, they tend to be debating like Dawkins types. And so they always tend to attribute, or they always conflate, you know, they'll say something like the atheist worldview as if there's only one, but and that's again assuming that worldview is a coherent concept that we can, I mean, maybe it's coherent, but I hear different definitions of worldview all the time. But they'll say like the atheist worldview says we're just matter in motion, or, you know, and so they're always conflating just being an atheist with like a physicalist metaphysic. And they do that all the time. And again, and I think they do that a lot because they think that they're debating people like Dawkins or people like Stein, who probably might adhere to that. And I mean, don't get me wrong, there are a lot of atheists who are physicalists, but, you know, if you're going to be trying to demonstrate the impossibility of the contrary, you can't be making that conflation.
Yeah, I mean, it's just convenient if your opponent takes on a load of very restrictive positions. Like, I mean, it's one thing to be a materialist in the sense that you think the soul doesn't exist or something, but it doesn't mean that you're committed to the view that all there is in reality is just matter in motion. That's a much more extreme view. I mean, you might be a physicalist about like the brain and the mind, but also think that there are like abstract objects or properties, or, you know, all sorts of weird, peculiar things that philosophers, you know, the notion of truth or moral values or whatever. You can have all of those things in principle and be a physicalist about the mind and the brain. You don't have to just be materialist about absolutely everything.
Yeah,
that's in fact quite a weird position. You know, possibly, I guess people do hold that view, but when you talk to like professional philosophers, they're going to have quite a nuanced range of views and take different opinions about different things. It might be an abstract objects guy when you're talking about numbers, but some kind of constructivist or something when you're talking about moral values. It doesn't mean you have to just take the same view on everything. So yeah, it's sort of a straw man, really.
Yeah, and I think that's probably what we're going to see in a lot of these clips, because obviously I took down notes and it was like the same thing over and over. It's like making that conflation over and over. But all right, let's see what else good old Bahnsen has to say.
There couldn't be any logic. Why not? Well, matter in motion, that's your worldview. The logic isn't material and it's not in motion. The laws of logic are abstract entities. The laws of logic are not something you can touch. They're not physical. The laws of logic are universal in application. They're not particular, temporal events or experiences. And they're absolute. They're without qualification. And so within your worldview, there could be no laws of logic.
All right, so I think that I'll stop it there. So first off, he already made the conflation. He said again, he was talking to the atheist, saying you just believe matter in motion, and then went off on laws of logic, which again, I mean, I guess he's assuming that if you're an atheist, you have to be some sort of nominalist who I guess you can't be a realist about laws of logic in any type of way, I guess.
Yeah, I guess so. But you know, if you think about it, all his argument would be not that he's really giving an argument. Well, maybe he is. Maybe he's saying something like logic is non-material, therefore materialism is false, something like that, right? But what's an argument against materialism? It's not an argument for the triune God of the scripture or whatever, right? You can't just like rule out materialism and then therefore prove Christianity. This is another one of the kind of like weird binaries. It's going to try and introduce this thought that there is only two worldviews. It's either materialism or Christianity. And obviously that's just like a weird narrowing of the range of options that are out there. Like clearly there's other things that other things you might think are true in between those two. So maybe he's offering a good argument against materialism. Like maybe, yes, I suppose if someone was to say, I believe that all that there is matter in motion, I, as an atheist, could come along and say, well, what about the laws of logic? And what do you mean? And run exactly the same thing that he just said. And and I might persuade them to abandon materialism. But that doesn't mean I've converted them to Christianity as a consequence. So like at best, I don't think it's a very good argument against materialism anyway, but at best, it's an argument against materialism and not an argument for Christianity. So
Right. And Bahnsen here, he's just giving a lecture, so he doesn't have an interlocutor, but what precepts will do a lot of times is when they start talking about like the laws of logic, and if they claim, you can't account for them, whatever exactly that means, which also is kind of a fuzzy, it's hard to pin down what they mean by account for laws of logic. But if they claim, well, you can't account for laws of logic, so once you start trying to throw rocks at their worldview, they'll say, well, the ground you're standing on is stolen ground, as they say, so you can't even toss those rocks, right? Those rocks belong to God, and that, I mean, that's kind of the precept playbook. So that, they never actually have to demonstrate how in their worldview, again, even assuming that they have a story that works out to quote unquote account for the laws of logic, they don't really have to demonstrate anything. They just have to claim that God can account for those. And then when you try to, when you try to refute that, they'll just claim that you don't have the epistemic tools or the metaphysical tools necessary to do so.
Yeah, and I mean it's more esoteric, but like just the phrase "the laws of logic" is kind of an antiquated sort of, I don't know, 17th, 18th century kind of Port Royal logic, sort of old school way of looking at things. And I mean, don't want to get too much into the weeds about it, but there are different, like, you can, so for instance, take some like classic law of logic, like the law of non-contradiction or something. Like these guys will say, you hear this so often on the internet. Classical logic has 3 laws: identity, non-contradiction, and excluded middle, right? And as if that's it, then all you need to know is there's 3 laws. But if that's all you think logic is, you've sort of fundamentally misunderstood. Like logic is about inference, right? It's about like certain things entailing other things. That's what it's the study of. It's not just the study of like, let's postulate 3 principles and just see, see what follows from them. You have to have some notion of inference. Yeah. And that's what and the point is just that like there is a system of logic that's called classical logic, and the propositional logic, so most basic logic that is kind of like the equivalent of arithmetic, is the sort of thing you could learn in school. It's like really super easy, and there's hardly any terms in there, and in that you have you can prove the law of non-contradiction and the law of excluded middle, although curiously there is no law of identity in that, because there's no identity symbol. So there are logical systems that don't have identity, so it can't be like this universal law that apparently is applicable in all domains except propositional logic, where it's not even stated. But I mean, the point is that you can specify that logic without having non-contradiction and excluded middle as axioms, as laws that you have to put in by hand. There's like an infinite number of ways that you could set up. You could have different axioms. You can specify it without starting with axioms. You could give a kind of semantic account of how logic works, and then the axioms just kind of a big fallout of the semantic machinery that you have. So like modern logic kind of is kind of gone beyond this old-fashioned way of talking about laws of logic. So even that is anachronistic and kind of cringe in the first place, to be like, aggressively asking people about the laws of logic. I mean, like it betrays like a lack of familiarity with modern logic.
Well, and I think it's interesting because when I was researching some videos for this video, I came across one apologist, and I don't remember who it was, who said something like, well, there's 3 laws of logic, and Christianity posits the Trinity. Like, coincidence? And it's like, there's more than 3 laws of, like, they highlight those 3, but even in classical logic, that formal system, there's also like the principle of explosion, and like there's at least 5, I believe, in that normal like classical logic formal system, but they only mentioned 3 of them. I mean, I don't know. I don't know, but
yeah, that might be Poitras who says that. But yeah, I mean, you can specify that propositional logic with just one axiom, right? That was there's this guy, logician and turn of the 20th century, Schaefer, who introduced this symbol, the Schaefer stroke, which is a bit like a kind of compound of, I can't remember exactly what it is, but it's like you can have this as your one symbol in propositional logic, and then define the others just off that as a basic one, and then you can there's an axiom you can give, and it's just that one axiom, and it's not the law of excluded middle or any of those things. It's just one formula, and then from that plus the inference rules, you can just derive everything in propositional logic. So you can do it with one axiom. And one of my favorite logicians, this guy Jan Łukasiewicz, who is a Polish logician in the sort of first half of the 20th century. He there was a sort of race amongst logicians to come up with the most compact single axiomatization of propositional logic, and he got it down to the smallest one, and also supplied a proof that there couldn't be a smaller one. So it was like definitely the smallest single axiomatization of propositional logic. So you see what I mean? Like none of these are laws that you have to have. Obviously, all these systems are equivalent to each other. So it's either an axiom that you put in the first place, or it's a theorem that you can deduce given a different starting point. So the system is what matters. The system will be the equivalent between these different formalizations of it. But the axioms themselves are kind of doesn't matter. It's just you pick a starting point, set it out, make it all clear, and then you can crack on and do the actual logic stuff, which is inferring things and seeing what deductions you can make.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I think the apologists view it as just like these 3 clearly abstract, I don't know, like they're on some sort of metaphysical pedestal. But if you have these different systems, I guess at best, maybe they could make the case that no matter if the laws are axioms or if they're derived as theorems, they're these universals that are necessary that need accounting for. That's maybe a little better than just saying there's these 3 laws of logic as if they supersede the formal system that they're promulgated in. I don't know. Yeah, it's just strange. But okay, let's keep going. I think this is one of my favorites. Greg Bahnsen was really good at like coming up with all these strange phrases, like I don't know if you've heard his crackers in the pantry fallacy. So now he's going to do the toothpaste proof of God's existence, which is essentially he's just making a case regarding I guess induction and the uniformity of nature. But this is his toothpaste proof of God's existence.
And what was going on. But here's the toothpaste proof of God's existence. If you squeeze the toothpaste tomorrow and expect the toothpaste to come out, if you squeeze the tube and expect the paste to come out, I want to argue you're working within a Christian framework about reality. Why is that? Well, because how do you know that the paste is going to squirt out tomorrow? You're going to answer, well, because of past experience. But of course, past experience is not relevant to what's going to take place tomorrow, is it? Unless what? Unless you add this premise. The future is like the past. Now, has anybody ever observed that? Has anybody observed the future? Go back to David Hume. A few minutes ago we were talking about. No one knows the future. No one's observed it directly, experientially, and no one knows what the relationship is between the past and the future. Therefore, whenever you expect something to happen based on past experience, you're assuming the Christian view of the universe, that God controls all things and keeps them regular. In an atheist universe, there shouldn't be any science. There shouldn't be any brushing your teeth. For all you know, the best way to, dental health is not to brush your teeth. You don't know the toothpaste is ever going to come out. You don't know anything about the future. But of course, atheists can't live that way, can they? Atheists must use the laws of logic. Atheists must assume the uniformity of nature in order to think scientifically. And atheists have got to live in this universe as though there are moral absolutes.
Okay. All right. I've never understood. Again, it's just like the apologist is, like you said, making a story. Greg Bahnsen is making a story for why they can supposedly, they're able to I guess, solve the problem of induction or account for the uniformity of nature, and the, again, quote unquote atheist worldview can't. But I've never really understood, again, how the Christian precept worldview provides these somehow necessary conditions that the atheist can't have, other than just saying, like, to me, this is just a God did it. God grounds uniformity of nature because he just does.
Yeah, I think that, like, there's on one hand the problem of induction, which is a weird problem, but it's if nothing else, it's an epistemological problem, right? It's like, how can you know about this? And it just seems that, like, when thought about in that way, you can just raise that puzzle again for his story, because what he's trying to say is that, like, on an atheist's perspective, they have no way of knowing that the future is going to be like the past. How do you know it's going to be like? How do you know the future is going to be like the past for the Christian? Well, because God's going to make it so that the future is like the past or something. But how do you know that? You can't say it because he did in the past, right? Exactly. And he's going to continue to do that in the future, because that's exactly the thing that he's criticizing the atheist about, right? That's the problem, exactly the problem. So what he's going to say is something like, what he's doing is it's a move out of the epistemological, like, to get out of that epistemological circle. He's just going to posit that there is a metaphysical regularity in nature, and it's this held in place by God's will or something. See, then if what we're doing is not really solving the epistemological problem directly, because, as I said, the problem just exists on his account, right? But if we can get out of it by just positing that there is some metaphysical regularity underneath nature or something, then anybody can do that. So, for instance, you might say, you might have a view of how objects work and causal powers, which is something like dispositional essentialism. So you'll say that things like a wine glass has a disposition to shatter if knocked on the ground in the right circumstances, right? That's the property of fragility. Well, if we're allowed to posit that the things out there have properties like that, so dispositions to manifest various behaviors given in stimulus conditions or something, then that's just a way of describing regularities that will manifest themselves. So if I'm allowed to have a big metaphysical picture about this is what the world is like, it's got these items in it and they operate in more or less this kind of way, then that provides an account, a story of why the future is going to be a bit like the past, because the kind of mechanisms that we're postulating kind of span both the future and the past, right? But, why am I not allowed to do that? Well, I'm not allowed to do that because Hume's problem is epistemological. How do you know any of that's true, right? And then you're stuck back in the kind of epistemological problem, which basically you can't get out of. So if Bahnsen's allowed to just sort of step outside the epistemological stuff and just posit some metaphysical machinery that's going to keep the world in clockwork order or something, anybody can do that. I mean, he's not solving the epistemological problem. He's just postulating some stuff out there. So obviously anybody could do that. So it's not, I just think he's, there's just nothing special going on here. Once you see it's like one of those people who, like, they've got a ball under a cup or something, and if you forget where it goes, oh yeah, wow, that's crazy. How did that happen? But once you spot it, once you notice how it works, then it's really easy to see.
Right. That's, what, I've never heard that rebuttal before. That's a really good point, how they step out of the epistemic problem and kind of make it more of a metaphysical issue. And I just always thought, I mean, even if you think God solves the issue, can God not make it the case that tomorrow will be different than, that the regularities of nature all of a sudden aren't going to hold? I mean, I guess they would say, well, because of his nature, he's going to do X, Y, and Z. But again, this is also dependent in some sense on scripture and tradition, which just also seems to me to run into the same issue, right? How do you know about that? How do you know that that's going to continue to hold? And then if you think about the Christian picture, they think that one day those regularities are going to end. They think that one day we're going to wake up and the world is going to there is going to be like this grand upheaval and Jesus is going to come back. And so I don't see how they're in a different epistemic boat than we are. And I think that's a really good point, what you said. So
yeah, I mean, if they were in a different epistemic, but like, for instance, imagine you're mixing chemicals in test tubes in some lab somewhere, and you mix two chemicals together and they do a certain reaction, and then you kind of wonder to yourself, well, oh no, let's say you do it again 2 minutes later and the same thing happens, and you think to yourself, well, have I stumbled across a regularity in nature, or is it just coincidence, right? Maybe there was some contingent, additional factor present that I wasn't aware of that was making it happen, and if I do it a third time, that contingent factor, like some dust or something in the air, that's not present, and it won't happen the next time round, right? You're kind of uncertain. All you can do is build an inductive case to begin to start to expect something. You never really know if you've got a real, like if you're carving nature at the joints, and what you've really found is actually
God doesn't add anything to that. There's
right, but the point is that, like, if you're a Christian, I mean, are you any better at determining, chemical reactions as opposed to an atheist? No, of course not. Even if, God doesn't tell you, like, whether it's going to rain tomorrow, or, whether two chemicals are going to get mixed together and go purple or something. That's not in the Bible, right? So it's in exactly the same epistemic situation, like, practically speaking, when it comes to wondering, is this generalization because it's a regularity, or is it just like seemingly so and it's a coincidence? That's another way of saying, will the future be like the past, right? And he's in exactly the same situation as me. And if he's not, go ahead and win some Nobel Prizes by like looking it up in the Bible and finding the regularities in chemical compositions and stuff. Like, obviously he doesn't have that. So it's just baffling. And I think all they're trying to say is not that they can really predict the future, but just that they have a story to tell about why the future will be like the past. But I can tell a story as well, right? Like,
yeah, no, absolutely. And it goes back to, they're just demonstrating they at best have a sufficient condition, right, by telling a story that supposedly works. But if they're trying to demonstrate the impossibility to the contrary, just telling a story is not going to do it. So all right, well, we'll move on from good old Bahnsen, and we'll jump to, I think Jeff Durbin is next. I don't know. Did you know about Jeff Durbin before?
Yeah, I heard Jeff. I think I first heard the Bahnsen-Stein debate because of a episode of his podcast from years ago where they played it, and then I realized, oh, these guys just love this. They were all so excited and energized by the ponage that was being dealt out. It's kind of 50s ponage or whatever. I suppose 80s ponage that was maybe 90s actually. When was the Bahnsen-Stein debate? Is it like 91 or
90s.
something? I
think it was in the 90s. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. But this is like like you have a band that influences famous bands, kind of like underground one that started it all.
Yeah.
That's the Bahnsen-Stein debate, and then all these other guys are just trying to be as good as to win a debate as demonstrably as Bahnsen did then.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, I didn't know if you had known of Durbin. I've known about him for a while. In fact, I don't know if because I know you've had conversations with Scott Clifton before, so I don't know if you had ever heard of Noah from Veritas 48. He was Veritas 48. Yeah, and he did a video, I think, on Jeff Durbin, and I thought he demolished presuppositionalism. He had a really great video. And Jeff Durbin ended up running to James White, and they did like a collective response to Noah. And they really like tried to just avoid a lot of there were a lot of things that they just never addressed that I thought Noah really nailed. But anyways, that's beside the point. So
yeah, I've been friends with Noah for years. Really cool.
Really?
Guy.
Okay. Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. All right. Well, let's see what he has to say here.
Within itself. And so presuppositional apologetics is not simply tag the transcendental argument for the existence of God. We're saying to the atheist, look, you don't have any basis that satisfies the preconditions necessary for laws of logic as universal, as unchanging, invariant, as necessary. You don't have any basis for an appeal to morality. Whose worldview has a foundation underneath it that gives rise to the necessity of integrity, honesty, reason, logic, consistency, order, science, mathematics, all of that. Whose worldview can justify an appeal to all those things? It ain't the atheist. Right. Hint, hint. It's not the atheist. The atheist doesn't have a foundation. What's he believe? Say if you take a Dawkins, he's a naturalistic materialist. He believes all that exists is the material universe. It's just matter and motion. That's all it is. We are, as Carl Sagan says, stardust. That's all we are. Stardust. bumping into stardust. And if you read Richard Dawkins, it's my favorite quote of his because it is devastating. If you read Richard Dawkins and the Blind Watchmaker, no, River Out of Eden, he says, there is no good, there is no evil, only blind and pitiless indifference. Really? Is that?
So, stardust bumping into stardust. All right. And I guess one of the things I'll remark on is, the precepts, they spend a lot of time trying to refute or debunk the atheist worldview or well, it's usually just the atheist worldview. But even if we were to grant that they refuted the atheist worldview, again, granting that worldview has a coherent meaning that we all agree to, I mean, that's not all the Christian has to contend with, because there's plenty of other theistic faiths, theistic religions, or even polytheistic that they also need to contend with. And of course, they'll say like, well, we can refute those quite easily. They really just take a jab at atheism. But there's tons of other worldviews that if you're going to demonstrate the impossibility of the contrary, or that only the Christian worldview, grounds the preconditions of intelligibility, you have a lot more work to do ahead of you. But of course, in this video, he's just once again conflating atheism with materialism or physicalism, and of course brought up Dawkins, just like we talked about. So
yeah, and I also think that the Dawkins quote is just quite a well-known instance of quote mining, because that there's nothing more than blind, pitiless indifference or whatever. I think the full context to it is he says something like, when it comes to the animal kingdom and the natural world, then there's nothing but blind, pitiless indifference or whatever. So like he's not, and Durbin goes on to say something here about how Dawkins is inconsistent because really he should lie and exploit his students when he's teaching or whatever, because there's nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. But I mean, I'm not really a Dawkins fan, but like, I mean, just to be clear about it, he's not saying that Darwinian kind of morality or whatever is what social norms should be governed by. That's not Dawkins's view. He's got a different account of morality. I don't really know what his view is, but he's not a Darwinian about moral values for sure. So he's quote mining Dawkins as well, which is also kind of cringe because everyone has to talk to quote Dawkins. I guess he had a book that was famous, but it would be great to not that they ever would, but they could quote Graham Oppie or Paul Draper or someone. Why not have a proper philosopher who's an atheist instead?
Well, and if they're gonna if he's making a case about morality, then talk about a non-believer or an atheist who believes in moral realism, like Russ Schaefer Landau or Michael Huemer, right? But no, I mean they take the low-hanging fruit, which is Richard Dawkins, or I think he said Carl Sagan about we are stardust, which I think Carl Sagan, I don't know that Carl Sagan was saying we're just stardust. He was just saying we're made of the particles, from stardust. So to kind of flip this into again like a physicalist material, like an eliminative materialism, is just dishonest if he knows. I feel like he should know that, but I think a lot of these precepts don't. They conflate the word atheist with materialist, and this is how they view it. Like we're going to see Sye Ten Bruggencate later, who has his famous talking about how when we think or do anything, we're just doing brain barf, which to me, it's just like, can you steel man the position and stop stop being so petulant with how you present, the opposing worldview. It's constant with these guys.
I mean, I think that like on one level, what is apologetics, right? It's one way of thinking about it is that it's a way of converting people to believe the thing that you believe. Right. So, you might be wanting to sort of persuade somebody who doesn't hold your view and change their mind. Maybe on its face, sometimes these people will talk like that, like they'll do the aggressive precept stuff, and then they'll say, but as Jesus said, and then something mild about how we should love each other, and they're my brothers and I love them, or something, right? It sounds really disingenuous, but I think that actually it's they're not actually trying to persuade any atheist. They're not really doing that at all. And there's this Bahnsen line about what he's trying to do is shut the mouth of the unbeliever. That's what he's actually trying to do, is shut them up. He's trying to prove them wrong or like destroy their worldview or something. But really, it's not even about that. It's not that he'll think, oh, mission accomplished if the atheist kind of walks away crying getting pwned so much. Actually, what I think is really going on is it's for the Christians like watching the debate to say to those Christians who were doubting their own views is to think that, oh, yeah, I see. This is going to make me less likely to doubt in future. Like, it's not even to shut the mouth of the unbeliever. It's to sort of shut the doubts of the believer. It's sort of an aggressive mind control thing. That's what's actually going on. Right? He's the real victim is the Christian in the pew who has to listen to this sort of aggressive, over the top. It's only one truth, and it's this. Well, it's like being in a cult. The precept line is so extreme. It's quite similar to the sorts of things you'll hear in cults, where the one leader is the only person you should listen to. Don't believe anyone outside the confines of the camp that we live in. They're all lying. They don't, they're all satanic and blah, blah, blah. The precept lines are very similar to that. Jesus, you're supposed to trust nothing but Jesus. And he's the only way you can know anything at all is if you believe in this one specific version of Christianity that we've got. And everyone else doesn't even have the foundations and whatever. And they're borrowing from our worldview to even say that blah, blah. It's a kind of, it's got very, very strong similarities to that. So that's what I think that, like, it's a version of apologetics that's really mind control on their own congregation. That's like the real meaning of this whole stuff.
Well, I think it's usually the precepts who will point to like Romans chapter 1, where it says something like, the unbeliever is suppressing the truth and unrighteousness. And and precepts a lot of times tend to be Calvinists as well. And so, I mean, they don't really have a high view of the atheist to begin with. They'll some of them will be jerks to your face and say that, but I've had plenty of precepts tell me, you already know God exists. You're just, again, you're suppressing the truth and unrighteousness. And so, their job, I don't think, is to, I have heard some of them say like, no, my job is to try to convert people or to show, just to demonstrate to them that their worldview is standing on stolen ground and to try to bring them back to God. But a lot of them, no, it's just they just want to win debates. It's a sport for them. This is why, like, I still, even on the last live stream I did about Jay Dyer, I tried to articulate quite clearly that I absolutely would debate Jay Dyer, because everybody asks me, because of the videos I've made, will you debate Jay? And I'm like, yes, I will. But for me, that should have nothing to do with the arguments that I'm promulgating. Like, a lot of them don't want to consider my arguments, apparently, unless I'm willing to sit down and do a debate with Jay, because they just want to see Jay cream me. And hey, he might, because Jay's really good at debates, and Jay's really good at kind of bullying his way when he's in a debate. So he very well could do the same to me. But what matters is the arguments, but they don't care about that. Like, they just care about, it's like a blood sport to them. They just want to watch their favorite apologist, pwn someone. So
it's just male dominance behavior. It's like sitting on someone so they can't move or something. That's what they want you to do, rhetorically speaking. But just whilst I have it in my mind, what is it, Romans 1, where it's the idea that you already know that God exists,
right,
and you're just suppressing the truth in unrighteousness. I mean, Bahnsen's PhD was about that exact idea. It's actually quite good. You can find a copy of it online. What he does is writes a sort of version of that where it's contrasting that Romans 1 idea with, I think it's Sartrean notions of bad faith. So Jean-Paul Sartre has this account of the self, kind of weird phenomenological existential thing, whatever. And his whole idea is that that there's this kind of radical freedom that is too difficult for you to live up to authentically, because it's crippling you. All the different things you could do with your life. You could just get up and leave your situation, whatever it is, and just go walk away and just do something else. And you, but people don't want to bear the responsibility, and will tell themselves, "Oh, I have to be here. I'm stuck in this situation," because it actually just takes options off the table. So they pretend that they're stuck in a situation, not because they actually are. They know they're not, but pretending that they're stuck makes their life easier for them. And so Bahnsen's taking that model, that's called bad faith by Sartre, and he's saying that's what's going on in Romans 1, is that unbelievers know that God exists, but they pretend that he doesn't, because then that makes it more easier for them to live the sort of sinful lives that they want to live anyway. So there's this kind of psychoanalysis thing you can do about speculating about what might be going on in people's kind of the structure of their beliefs or whatever. But it's not, they're interesting, these kinds of ideas. But the thing is that, like, Bahnsen's not the only person, or the Christian is not the only person who can do that. So there are other stories you can tell. So another interesting one you can see from this guy Ernest Becker. I don't know if you're aware of Becker.
Yes.
Yeah. So then he's going to say, well, what's going on is there's this like deep existential dread of the oncoming death that is going to be kind of utter finality in the end of everything from your point of view. But that reality is too difficult to like keep alive in your psyche or whatever. So what you do is like bury it underneath layers of sort of fictions that pretend as if that's not going to happen. You just kind of like engage in projects as if you're going to keep going forever and whatnot. But that obviously lends itself as a critique of religion, because religion is like some sort of sublimation of this idea where it bubbles up as this kind of idea that maybe there's no death at all and I'll be saved by this really nice force that will look after me forever or something. And so you can think of it, it's very easy to say, God exists and you just want to live in your sin. You could just shout back, well, that death is inevitable. It's going to be the end of everything. That's why you pretend that there's some nice force out there that's going to look after you forever. And it's just kind of a stalemate because,
exactly.
Let's see his prove either of these ideas, right? It's a psychoanalysis. It's not something you can definitively prove. It's just sort of interesting supposition. So I think, on that one, it's kind of anyone can play that game. Again, it's just a story anybody could tell.
Yeah, exactly. Anybody can play the psychoanalyzing game, and I agree. It's just a stalemate. So, that's whenever they bring up Romans 1, I'm just like, all right, I'm checking out. And I with Derek from Myth Vision, I went on his podcast and talked about my deconversion, and I had a Christian who used to use that precept line, like, well, you're just a Christian because you want to sin, and I'm sorry, you're just an atheist because you want to sin. After he saw my deconversion story and saw like, well, I didn't want to leave the faith, and it took a lot of, it took me. Oh, what happened? You still there? Sorry for me. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. And so after he saw that, he was a little bit more sympathetic to my point of view. And we had some chats back and forth, and he seemed to be a little bit more open to not promulgating that nonsense. But then a couple months later, he was saying the same thing. He was like, you're suppressing the truth and unrighteousness. And I was like, okay, well, at this point, I can't really do anything to convince you otherwise. So there's no point in talking about that. So
sometimes I feel like when people say that you just want to live in your sin so much, I kind of just feel like, oh, mate, the lady doth protest too much. I wonder what weird sin you engage in that you want to know about. But, check that insinuation at me, buddy.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's funny. All right, let's see. I'm gonna move to 644, and then after this clip we'll move on to another one.
So here's the point. Transcendental argument against for the existence of God is a way of getting at this important element in that discussion with the atheist, is that apart from the Christian God, you can't know anything. Apart from the Christian God, you can't prove anything. If you don't start with the revelation of God, you do not have the preconditions necessary to make sense of all that you're saying and all that you're doing. However,
so I don't want to make it seem like I'm cutting him off at a convenient part for us, but that's just really he was just like explicating tag again. But I mean, I think pretty much what we've said already kind of covers. I mean, they rattle this off. Like, again, they rattle off their story. I rarely see them ever take that would be his burden of proof to bear. And I rarely see them like try to bring that to fruition in any sense. It's usually a shifting of the burden of proof where if again, he doesn't have an interlocutor there, but if you were to ask him, can you demonstrate that? He's going to put it back on you and say, well, you're an atheist, so you believe X, Y, and Z that he already promulgated, and boom, the burden of proof is shifted.
Yeah, it's just that if you personally can't right now tell me what the laws of logic are, and put up a reasonable defense against like a line after line after line of criticism of whichever one. Because if you say, "Oh, I'm a conceptualist," okay, he's got this decision tree where he knows, "Oh, if they say that, I'm going to say all of these things." If you try and say, "Well, it's I'm a realist about it," he's going to go down the other branch of that. So you've got to like defend whatever random thing it is, induction, materialism, whatever. And if at any point you falter, he's going to say, "Aha, that means your worldview is incoherent."
Exactly.
And then it's supposed to be, therefore, Christian God is my worldview must be true. And he hasn't said anything about whether he can explain what are the laws of logic on the Christian view. We never hear this from the precepts. At most, they'll say something like, "It's like divine ideas" or something.
Yeah, divine concepts, or you get different answers, but yeah.
Yeah, but it's like as if there's no criticisms of divine conceptualism, right? This is just one of the views that philosophers discuss in philosophy of religion. Really, metaphysics of logic doesn't really tend to go into this type of stuff mostly, but there are people in philosophy of religion who will postulate things like so divine conceptualism, or there's this other view that the laws of logic are created by God. Anyway, but both of those views have drawbacks to them and criticisms. I have a paper actually on criticizing divine conceptualism for people who are interested in reading a bit more about that. But yeah, I mean, they just try and say, well, this materialist view of X is bad, therefore the Christian view must be true, without ever thinking that maybe both views are questionable, and maybe nobody really knows the answer to what the ultimate foundations of induction or the laws of logic are. Maybe just nobody knows that very well, and all anybody's got is kind of speculative, sort of half-baked theories, and that's it. So it's just a sort of simple one-sided. If I knock over your position, my position wins by default.
Right. No, and I think an important point too is the precept will usually say the Christian worldview. And again, it's not clear that there is a single Christian worldview. I mean, as it is, you have tons of denominations. I would probably say that someone like Jay Dyer, who's an Eastern Orthodox, might say that someone like Jeff Durbin, who I believe is Protestant, is not a real Christian. And so it would be interesting to see them kind of hash it out. But yeah, I mean, what Christian worldview? There's, a Unitarian Christian worldview. Probably a lot of other precepts would say no, but what is the line of demarcation there? It's not clear. I mean, again, the concept of worldview is fuzzy at best. But even assuming that it were, a little bit more rigid, how do you determine what is specifically the Christian worldview? And once there's a lot of differences there, then you have, I guess, different ways that they're conceptualizing that God is grounding certain things and certain truths and certain doctrines. So I don't know. To me, that just doesn't. It seems like an issue that they never address.
Yeah, definitely. There's definitely no single Christian worldview. So just as implausible as thinking that there's one single non-Christian worldview.
Right.
But it just comes down to the vagueness of the word worldview. I mean, if you take it to mean not very much, other than belief that Jesus is God or something, I mean, okay, fine, then maybe there is just one Christian worldview. But how fine-grained do you want it to be? Does it have to be views on transubstantiation, and does it have to be views about laws of logic and all this nonsense? Then of course there's going to be as many Christian worldviews as there are Christian people, because they're all disagree to some extent over those different details. I mean, it's the thing. It's like the thing about this is like the worldview dilemma, because on the one hand, it's a worldview is either something that is a well worked out systematic philosophy of all these topics, in which case it's false that everybody has one, because clearly most people don't. And if that's what they're saying, that it's got to be some systematic thing like that, then I'm just going to say, well, I don't have one. So it's no point even talking about what's true on my worldview, because I'm according to that notion, it's just not something I have. But then if it's something where we all definitely have it, then the only thing that seems plausible is it's just a kind of list of all of the things that you believe. And if that's the case, and definitely everybody's got one of those. But yeah, obviously there are going to be tons of them, but also most of them are going to be incoherent to some extent. Almost everybody will believe two things that are jointly incompatible with one another without realizing it. I mean, this happens all the time. Someone will point out, you believe this, but you also believe, you believe X over here, but you believe not X over there. like in a debate or something, you could bring this out that they've committed to two contradictory looking things. Somebody has to like deal with that. It's not impossible that you could do that. It's normal. That happens every day. So I mean, it can't be a criticism of me that my list of beliefs, my worldview on that fine-grained view, it's not a criticism of me that list is inconsistent in some way or other. Like it probably will be. Everybody's will be. So like this is why it's a dilemma, because if you go down one route, no, it's not true that everybody's got it. If you go down the other route, it's not true that they're always consistent. So you can't insist both that everyone's got it and it has to be consistent, which is basically what these guys are trying to say. You've got a worldview, and if I can find any hole in that worldview, then it's sunk. Right? And so I think that it just doesn't work on either of those sort of horns.
That's good. I've never heard that before. The worldview dilemma.
Yeah, I think I made that up.
That's right. We're gonna copyright it, so it's yours. By the way, and I forgot to mention, so I did introduce you, but I forgot to mention your YouTube channel is Thoughtology. You also have a blog. Do you still write on your blog?
Oh, very occasionally I do, yeah.
Yeah, it's use of reason, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's right.
Okay. So yeah, go check that out. Both of those. But okay, let's jump to the next one. And I think the next one will be interesting because, well, for a couple of reasons. I don't think many people would classify Andrew Wilson as a precept, but he's in the camp he's in that Eastern Orthodox camp with Jay Dyer and Jim Bob. And so he does, he usually talks politics, and I mean, he's not any better at talking politics, but yeah, most people know him talking about politics and like Christian nationalism and against feminism. But I was able to scrape the bottom of the barrel and find a clip of him trying to present some kind of a tag argument. And granted, you'll see in this clip, the moderator, the guy tells him you have 4 minutes to do this. So obviously we'll cut him a little bit of slack because he's trying to prove God in 4 minutes. But at the same time, he makes a lot of, I think when you look at someone like Jay Dyer, because Jay in some respects knows a lot of philosophy, I don't think Andrew Wilson knows as much. So he says a lot of things that are just, it's very strange the way he articulates them. You could tell like he has some understanding of some of these things, but then he just makes a lot of weird conflations. So anyway, and then he's
what's the context for, like, he's dialing into some show where they're all in the same room.
Right. So he's streaming, or he's not present.
Do you know what the podcast is that he's dialing into?
Yeah, do you not know? Because I was going to mention it. It's probably best that you don't know, Alex, because this is one of the most toxic. It's called the Whatever Podcast, and it's really just it's really toxic. They talk about they talk about like feminism and sometimes they talk politics, but they usually always have Andrew on. Sometimes they've had Jay Dyer on. Sometimes they've had Jim Bob on. I haven't really seen too many other male guests besides those. They seem to cycle between those three for some reason, but it's normally Andrew. There's this really funny clip of, I assume you know a little bit about Andrew Wilson, right?
Yeah, I know he's a fucking asshole.
So he's like, I would say he's one of the poster boys of kind of, in a sense, like toxic masculinity. But there was one show where they asked him, I don't know what the context was, because I just saw when he was trying to open an olive jar, and they were like, can you open this? And and he was like, of course I can. And he's trying to open it, and he's trying and he can't open. And of course everyone gave him shit for it, because they're like, oh, you're supposed to be this, this masculine guy and who's preaching against feminism, and you can't even open a little olive jar. So it went viral, I think, on Twitter. So people still give him shit for it. They're like,
nice.
If he debates someone and they're like, oh, you destroyed him. But, if your interlocutor was an olive jar, we know you would go down. But anyway, so yeah, this is not a great podcast for anyone that appreciates like genuine intellectual discourse. A lot of times people are just shouting at each other. But anyways, yeah, so that's the context.
Okay.
All right.
Here, you said, are you religious?
No, I'm not.
No. You said, I'm going to give, if you guys want to engage on this, I'll give you guys 5 minutes, you and Andrew. You said God is a man-made concept used to enforce morality, as are all religions. I believe Jesus was a real man, but he was not the Son of God, as God is not real, your words. not mine. You guys, Andrew, is this something you want to bite on? Is this something you want to bite on?
Yeah, absolutely.
But let me just let's do it's 10:15 now. You guys have 4 minutes, 10:20. Go ahead.
Okay, so let's start just very quickly the concept that God is made up.
Right.
Okay. And that's actually a way more powerful claim than you're not sure. You realize that, right?
Yeah, I mean, technically, I'm not sure because I think that's the most logical.
So then if you're not sure, you're conceding that there could be a God.
There could be, but the percent chance that the being that they describe in the Bible is real or any other religious book, I think, is not likely. No.
Yeah, okay. So then you're not an atheist, you're an agnostic.
Yes.
You're saying it could be true.
Correct.
Okay, gotcha. Let me ask you this. Do you believe that the laws of logic are real?
So I'm just going to stop right there. Like that's like a loaded question that's super ambiguous. Do you believe that the laws of logic are real? In what sense? Like as if that's just like a clear ontological question that you can just say yes or no to, right? I mean,
yeah. And like I this feels unfair because Andrew's not a philosopher either, but this woman I don't suppose has ever read anything on this very esoteric random question in philosophy. But he's not going to be charitable or nice about it. But just he already, even before this, he was trying to say, well, if you concede that God could exist, then you're an agnostic. But that doesn't seem right. I think he's already wrong about that. It's just, what do you believe is true? If you believe that God doesn't exist, it's still, you could still say, my view is that he doesn't, but maybe he does. I'm not completely certain about that.
Right.
Whereas he's trying to say, unless you say that you're completely certain about it, you're an agnostic. So the only person who can be called an atheist is someone who's completely certain that God doesn't exist. But I think you could just, I think it just is what do you believe? If I believe God doesn't exist, and I'm an atheist, regardless of whether I'm completely certain about it.
Right.
So I think, I mean, I don't want to get involved in the kind of like, what does atheist mean? But his view on what it means does seem very implausible.
Yeah.
You have to be completely certain, otherwise you're an agnostic. That seems a bit strange.
Yeah, no, I agree on that. Let's see what else he has to say. All right. Do you believe in the law? He said, do you believe that the laws of logic are real?
I actually don't know what all the laws of logic are.
Well, so like, for instance, let's just take the law of identity. You can't be the person next to you, and the person next to you can't be you. You have to be you, and only you can be you, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and is that always true, or is that a man-made construct?
I'm pretty sure that's always true.
Well, if it's always true.
Okay, sorry. I don't want to have to keep stopping this video over and over, but it's like, first off, that's a weird like explication of the law of identity, right? Like that seems more to me to be like the identity of indiscernibles. That's not exactly the law of identity, right? The way he stated it.
I mean, it depends what he's, I mean, I suppose in a way it might be, it depends what you mean by the law of identity. I mean, if it just means for all x equals x, I mean, okay, it's hard to know. Well, that does seem kind of trivial. Like it's just a kind of law. I'm not aware of any kind of systems of logic where that's not true, I guess. I mean, like I said, propositional logic doesn't have any equals symbols, and so it's not statable even in that. But yeah, the principle of the indiscernibility of identicals, it would just be to say if two things are identical, if x equals y, then for any property that x has, y has that property. But I think what he's saying was you can't be the other person and the other person can't be you. But now it sounds like we're talking about personal identity, which is a bit different because it's about, I mean, anyone who's read Derek Parfit, so Derek Parfit's this philosopher who
I've heard of him,
who did loads of interesting stuff, but one of his main sort of contributions to philosophy was to sort of make people much more confused about what it means to be the same person over time. Right? So these ideas of like so here's a great sort of thought experiment for this. Imagine, it's like a sci-fi sort of story, but in the near future they have like teleporters, and when they first invent them, you get a bit sort of cautious about whether you should go in it, because you're not quite sure if what your theory of personal identity is. Are you going to really be the same person who materializes, or are you just going to die and a copy of you is going to be made or something? But then after a while, your friends do it every day. Your wife does it. She persuades you to try it, says it's no big deal. And then after a while, you do it. And after a while, it becomes normal to you, etc., etc. But then one day what happens is you go into the booth on Earth to teleport yourself up to your job on Mars or something. Yeah. And what normally happens is like you step in the booth and the door shuts and the room fills with smoke, and then you sort of pass out, and then you like just sort of tingly sensation happens, and you wake up in the other booth on Mars, right? And you step out and get on with your job, and that's what it is. That's your commute every day, is to do that. But this time what happens is the smoke happens, you don't fall asleep, and then you sort of stood there and the smoke clears, and you can see the sort of technician looking a bit worried, tapping away on the keyboard, and they let you out, and you're like, what happened? And they say, oh, it's just been a bit of a malfunction. But then you can see on the TV screen a copy of you getting out of the teleporter on Mars. And what happened is that it copied you, but it didn't delete the original one. And then there's this question of like, well, which one are you now? Like, I mean, because the person who wakes up, they have the same experience that you've always had when you went through it. And before you thought that was enough to generate your identity, you've been thinking that you're the same person every day who's been teleporting up there, but now you don't think that you're the same person, because you think you're the person who stayed here. So anyway, there's these thought experiments that like mean personal identity, if you branch into two different people, then there's no fact of the matter about which one of them you are. And then Parfit also talks about cases where you can goes back in again, so two people could branch away, one person branches into two like an amoeba, but then they kind of fuse back again into one person. Anyway, the question about what personal identity is and like what matters to the survival of the future versions of you and who you should care about and blah 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 is kind of complicated. But I mean, in those cases of fusion where two people become one person over time, I mean, one straightforward way of thinking about that is that two distinct people, like that girl and the person next to her, in the future go into some machine, get fused together, and then become one person. But one person walks out of the teleporter or whatever. I mean, maybe that will happen. So what he's talking about, this question of personal identity, seems very like, there's loads of open issues there. It's not really clear what to think about that. It's not just the trivial law of identity for all x equals x, right? That's, there's no puzzles really relating to that. So I don't really think he is talking about the law of logic, because he doesn't know what a law of logic is. He doesn't never deduced anything in a formal theory. I'm confident about that. Also, he doesn't know anything about Derek Parfit or what personal identity over time is either. But like, I mean, I think he just has no idea what he's talking about, which is no wonder this poor woman's going to be confused about what line of reasoning he's taking her down.
I actually think she does a good job of answering his questions, despite the fact that she probably doesn't know much about it philosophically. And then right before I cut it off, Andrew said, "Is it always true?" Speaking of the law of identity, he says, "Is that always true, or is it a man-made construct?" Which I think is a false dichotomy. I mean, why can't it be a construct that's always true? I guess. I mean, that's a position, right? I mean, but I guess but in 4 minutes, I don't know that she's going to catch him on false dichotomies. I mean, I don't know what you think about that.
I mean, in the philosophy of mathematics, right, there's this kind of realist view that's sometimes called Platonism, just realism about mathematical truths, right, which would be to say that there's truths of mathematics that are independent of anybody's minds or something thinking about them. And then there are other views that are kind of called constructivist views. One of them is called intuitionism. It's kind of one of the main schools of philosophy of mathematics. But then what they're saying there is that, like, so for instance, like if you're trying to prove, say you've got some unproven mathematical conjecture, if it's currently unproven, then either this formula is true or false, right? Because it's mathematics, but nobody knows yet because they haven't proven either it or its negation. So we don't know which one of them it is. So the constructivist is going to say something like, well, it just isn't true or false. It's a gap. So not all mathematical statements Like the law of excluded middle basically doesn't hold. It has exceptions to it. And,
Right.
and like what happens is that when it's proven, it becomes true. So it's like mathematical statements are constructed, like the truths of mathematics are constructed
Right.
by the process of formal deductions. So in that sense, then, I don't suppose he's got this kind of thing in mind, but it sort of made me think of that it's either constructed by minds or people or something like the intuitionists would say about mathematical statements, or it's the realist view, which is that they're just true or false independently of what we actually come to prove. They were sort of always true or always false before we proved them.
Right.
I guess.
Yeah, which seems to me again to be a false dichotomy. But again, I wouldn't. Again, I wouldn't expect Andrew to know all this. But then again, he seems to be parroting. I guarantee you, like he's just been watching some Jay Dyer, and he's like, oh, okay, I can argue from the laws of logic, and he doesn't really know things like that, like intuitionism and whatnot. So, okay, well, let's see where he takes it. I have an idea. It might be he's taking it towards God, but who knows?
True. That's really, really strange, right?
But
how could you have a thing which does not exist but is always true? How could that be possible?
3 minutes.
I'm not sure how to answer, but I don't think that God is not always real because not everyone believes he's real. So by that logic,
What does that have to do with anything?
So
it doesn't matter if you believe that the law of identity is real, it's still real, right?
Right, but I don't think that works for God, unfortunately.
Well, you don't think that works for God?
No, because I don't think that there's some man in the sky that's going to rain frogs down. And
what do you mean a man in the sky? Your conceptualization of God is very bizarre here, but let's just stick back with the idea of these metaphysical truths like the law of logic. Mm-hmm. Is mathematics something which is discovered, or is it something which you invent?
I think it's something invented to describe a reality.
And that reality is what?
Is if I have 2 oranges in this hand and 2 oranges in this hand, I have 4 oranges. The reality is the oranges.
So 2 + 2 always equals 4, whether or not your mind is present to perceive that that's true.
Yes.
So these things are true regardless, they're mind independent, right?
Yes.
So if these things are not created by man, but rather exist instead as a metaphysical conceptualization of truth, how is that possible absent a creator?
A creator. So there's a lot there. I actually thought that she did a decent job answering that. I mean, she's essentially saying that laws of logic they describe the way that things behave, which I think is a pretty good position to take. It's the position I usually take, but and then I don't know. Andrew said something really strange, and I wrote it down to make sure because I thought like he's saying something that's kind of incoherent. He said these laws exist as a metaphysical conceptualization of truth, which doesn't seem to me to make much sense. They're not. I mean, you can say that they're conceptualizations which are true, but to say they're a metaphysical conceptualization of truth sounded really strange.
Yeah, he uses they all sort of jumble together technical philosophical words,
right?
And preconditions of intelligibility, those types of things, without really knowing what they're talking about. That's right. And is this incoherent? But I think he's sort of. I'm not sure she actually committed to it, but maybe she did before this clip or something. Mm-hmm. That all truths are like conceptual or concepts in people's minds or something. So like on the one hand, like there's this level at which all truths are conceptual. Like, I mean, mm-hmm. the things you think about, right? Obviously. Right. But then on the other hand, there's this like the realist about. So if I think about like a potato or something, then there's the thought of the potato is obviously conceptual, but realists about potatoes think that beyond the idea of the potatoes, there actually are things in reality that are called potatoes that really exist, and then they're not ideas; they're physical things, right? And so you know, same goes with truths. You know, you might just say, well, obviously there are concepts of, you know, I think that X is true or something, and that's a thought in my mind. But if you're a realist about truth, then you think that truth is a thing that like exists independently of your thoughts, and that simple distinction between the concept of the thing and the thing itself. It's easy when I just say it like that, but people who don't study philosophy routinely fall over on that distinction and will agree, oh yeah, everything is conceptual. And then you go, oh, so then it's like because they just think, well, yeah, I'm thinking about stuff on the concept of the potato is what they're thinking about at that point.
Right.
And then it's like you go, oh, so you think everything, you're just like a kind of idealist who doesn't believe, an anti-realist about every concept then. So if I can ever get you to agree that something is real, then there's a contradiction, because you, on the one hand, had some kind of conceptual idealist or something, but I've just got you to agree that potatoes are real. So I've defeated your worldview or something. And I think that's what's going on here. Did she agree to this kind of radical conceptualism? I don't know.
That's a good question. I didn't see the clip before this, but it seems like they barely jumped into this, so I highly doubt it. And they rarely discuss religion on this podcast, so I don't think I don't know when the moderator was reading her statement, he's like, you said that God is man-made or a fiction or something like that. I don't know where he was reading that from. So I don't know the exact context, but I would imagine there's not much context since they barely jumped into this and they were like, you have 4 minutes. So,
and they probably exploit the kind of view that, there's these like gender identities that are social constructions, and they'll reject biological essentialism or something. So presumably Andrew Wilson's going to be trying, really what's going on is that he's going to be using this highfalutin metaphysics and philosophy stuff, but really what he's got in mind is these people think, these people like trans people, and trans people make me feel sick, so I'm going to get them. That's basically what's actually going on. Presumably
and that's what they constantly yammer about on that. I'm telling you, it's not. And I've never sat down and watched the podcast because I value my time and my sanity. But of course, I've seen clips pop up, and again, because like Jay Dyer's on there sometimes, and Jim Bob, I've watched clips. There is a clip actually where there's this one girl, and I forget her name, but she brought up Agrippa's trilemma to Andrew Wilson, and that was an interesting discussion because I don't think Andrew had heard about it before, and she was the one kind of promulgating this philosophical or showing her philosophical prowess. So it was pretty interesting, but even then it was very surface level type discussion. But anyways, so I mean they talk a little bit more, but I think we can move on.
Yeah.
Sound good? All right. We'll move on to bigger and better things, which in this case is Sye.
Oh God.
Let's see. All right. I think this one we'll do the 44 minute. Let's see. And it's interesting that we were just talking about truth and whatnot and how it's conceptualized, because this is the clip I wanted to highlight of Sye was his arguments that somehow truth relies on or is grounded in God. So, let's see. All right.
They don't know what truth is, and they're going to say our Bible's not true, and we let them. How do I know the Bible's true? Because God has revealed it to be true. And without him, you couldn't even make sense of your question, because you can't account for truth. You see, we can define truth. Truth is whatever conforms to the mind of God.
All right, just pause there before he keeps going, because
our thoughts are the mere.
It's a weird thing to say, because it sounds like you think what he's going to say is some version of like the correspondence theory of truth, where like a proposition is true, like if and only if it corresponds to the way that the world is, right? So kind of sometimes I don't know why the only time you ever hear the word comports is when people say, truth is that which comports to reality or something. I hear this type of thing all the time. But it's like he wanted to do that, but then instead of, he just wanted to say, well, it's what comports to the mind of God. But that just seems like a really weird sort of non-starter account of what truth is. I mean, like if I say, it's true that this is a phone, right? Well, what does that mean? That it comports not to anything about the object that I just picked up. Conforms to what? Some aspect of God's mind. How could I possibly know whether the sentence I just said comports to God's mind? That it's either true or false that this thing is a phone. How's it got any relation to? Obviously, if it's got relation to anything, if it's a question of that statement comporting itself to something to match it, and that's what we mean, that kind of matching being what's true and not matching meaning false.
Right. And I guess the apologists would say
mind matches do.
Yeah, exactly. I would say, well, they're going to say, well, God, I guess, only believes true propositions, but then now now you're not defining true in the same way. Now you're defining God's thoughts as true.
Yeah, no doubt. God only believes true things. He's infallible, right? Never believes any false things. That's fair enough. But I mean, the question is like, what is truth, right? And just all that it still feels like, what does it mean to say that God has a true belief? If God believes that thing is a phone, isn't it just that something about the belief matches the facts about the phone in some way? I mean, what else are we talking about? How could it be? I mean, if God's beliefs were true, but the theory of truth was that the sentences or the beliefs had to match God's mind, then it would be a little circle where God's beliefs were kind of trivially true, because whatever they were, they would match God's beliefs. So and that would just mean, why would you want to base anything on that? Like, and anyway, it would cut the phones and such, or the potatoes and the things that we might have beliefs, the actual things, it would cut them out of the theory. And all you would need to do is match sentences to this sort of self-referential God mind thing. It's not clear at all what the fuck he's talking about.
Yeah, it's kind of like a divine idealism almost. I don't know what.
Yeah, I guess so. I guess it is, but not about the nature of abstract objects, but about the notion of truth itself, right?
Right.
So I think this is one of the sort of weakest points of the presup kind of authoritarianism, which is that they have to say everything is to be grounded in Jesus or in God or whatever, in Christianity, in the Christian worldview. But instead, you get to these kind of bedrock notions of like, what is truth? It's hard to see how there could be a Christian account of what truth is. It's got nothing to do, can't have anything to do with, God or whatever. It's just, it's something that you use in order to get going to describe stuff like whether God exists, right? Truths are things that are already taken for granted. So going back to that philosopher or logician I was talking about before, Yukasevich, the one that proved the very smallest axiomatization of propositional logic. He also has this book on Aristotle's proofs of non-contradiction. And remember, Aristotle thinks that the law of non-contradiction is the most indisputable truth that there could be. There's nothing you can imagine that would be more certain and foundational than that. But Yukasevich thinks that there's something like that P is true, that there's some P such that P is true, something like that is a more foundational principle that you need before you can even get to stating the law of non-contradiction. It's just simple notion of truth, and she comes even more foundational than the law of non-contradiction itself. And it seems like these sorts of things, if there really is any ground floor to reality or whatever, it's, I think, at least plausible, at the very least, that these things are under and more foundational than the notion of God, even than the sort of presup, authoritarian, absolutist notion of God. Like, I can't see how you get that off the ground if you're not already presupposing a notion of truth in the first place. But for Sye Ten to think that truth is just one of those things that you define in relation to God, it's crazy. It makes no sense.
Well, and it's interesting because I've seen different precepts define truth in different ways. You will see some precepts who are like, no, it is, of course, a correspondence theory. But then you have some like Sye. And then, I don't know if you've ever heard this, but Jim Bob, I've heard him define truth literally as Jesus. And I guess, obviously, he's going off of scripture where Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. But I've literally heard him say, no, truth just is Jesus, which to me, I haven't had a chance to ask him. But I was like, well, what does that mean? So if I say, the cat is on the mat, if I say that proposition is true, I'm saying that proposition is Jesus. I don't know. I don't know what that means. And I'm sure he would flesh it out at some point. And maybe he means some sort of divine conceptualism or divine idealism or whatever. But it's just, I don't know. It's just, they all define truth in some strange way, it seems.
But like, clearly when Jesus says, I am the truth and the way and whatever, what he means then, because obviously it's just translated, but the notion of truth that is being picked out in the English translation there, it's like if you say that the arrow's flight was true or something, right? Or if the snooker cue's aim was true, it means that it's like good and reliable and the right
Right.
thing, whatever. It's like doing it the right way, some kind of notion of teleology or something like that. It
Yeah.
doesn't mean truth as in the kind of logical notion of truth, like a proposition
Yeah.
being true or something. Like and it'd be stupid to think that, and if yeah, it'd be crazy to think that he was doing that to try and conflate that Bible verse as if it was a theory of truth where, you know, P is true if and only if P is Jesus. That would be, I mean, it'd be funny if you can get him to say that, honestly. It's
P is
obviously,
true if P is Jesus. I love it.
yeah, right. It just can't possibly be what he means.
I wouldn't be surprised if that's what he meant.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. All right, let's keep going. So Sye can rattle off his famous brain barf phrase.
Byproducts of the chemical processes in our evolved brains, you don't get truth. You get brain barf.
Nice.
Yeah.
You see, Doug Wilson, he was talking about this experiment. He said, can you imagine if you took a bottle of Dr. Pepper and a bottle of Mountain Dew and you shook them up and you open them up and they start to fizz? That would be the byproduct of a chemical reaction.
Can I just say, can you just go back to where he does the and they start
The
to
byproduct
fizz?
of chemical reactions.
To where he does the what?
Where he said if you took a bottle of Mountain Dew and a bottle of whatever it was, I just want to note how camp it is when he says fizz. He does this like whoo. I just think it's important to mock these people.
Yeah, that's true.
In our evolved brains, you don't get truth. You get brain barf. You see, Doug Wilson, he was talking about this experiment. He said, can you imagine if you took a bottle of Dr. Pepper and a bottle of Mountain Dew and you shook them up and you open them up and they start to fizz? That would be the byproduct of a chemical reaction. You know what atheists say that our thoughts are? The byproduct of chemical reactions.
I actually thought it was funnier just the way he says brain barf. I don't know when he hits the F, brain barf. I don't know what
he's not like the.
Go ahead. Sorry.
My fizz at the moment, my brain bath for this clip is he's the most humorless person I think I've ever encountered. He's just so horrifically serious the whole time. You know, I don't think I've ever seen him smile or enjoy himself or in any way. It's and I think I'm right in. So
you got to be serious when you're defending Jesus.
Yeah, we're right, but not loving or kind or generous or any of those virtues. He's like cold and he's like a military dad who's like constantly on your ass all the time for your room not being clean or whatever. He's like some sort of fucking asshole as well. But yeah, so I think Doug Wilson, the guy, I don't know why he has to like name drop somebody for this like basic of bitch analogies that he's come up with here for the fizzing of the juices or whatever. But Doug Wilson, I read about the other day, I think Pete Hegseth, who's the like Secretary of War in America, I think he goes to Doug Wilson's church. I think Doug Wilson is like maybe not the preacher in his exact church, but it's like a quite small denomination at Doug Wilson. So I think, does that mean that Sye Ten Bruggencate is also in? Does that mean that Pete Hegseth is a presup? Is that what that means? I mean,
that wouldn't surprise me. I don't know much about Pete Hegseth's like specific apologetic methodology, but that wouldn't surprise me whatsoever.
Yeah, I think that's what it means. And so the stern disciplinarian military dad is like now in charge of like America's actual military right now.
Yeah, I mean,
it's cool.
Yeah, well, it's scary from my point of view since since us Americans are the assholes dropping bombs on people. But it wouldn't surprise me if, when people were asking him about how he was bombing, schoolgirls in Iran, if he was like, well, to ask that question, you're standing on, you need the preconditions of intelligibility.
Yeah, definitely. I can picture that.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. So yeah, I didn't even connect those. I mean, I never knew what church Hegseth belonged to. I mean, I knew that he's like a Christian nationalist and whatnot, but yeah, I mean, that doesn't surprise me one bit.
Yeah, I just read it. I read an article about it the other day, and I was like, Doug Wilson, I know that name. And the only place I know that name from is Sye Ten Bruggencate doing always this same example and saying that Doug Wilson came up with it. It must be the same person, I think.
Well, he's got to give Doug Wilson the credit for that incredibly astute and erudite. All right, let's see. We'll do a little bit more Sye, and then we'll jump to maybe the last one. You let me know how you're doing on time.
Yeah, we can keep going. That's cool.
Okay.
If you did that experiment and shook up and you had one fizz and one, which of those fizzes would be true? You don't get truth from chemical reactions. For truth, you need God.
So, I mean, I guess we can stop it there. And I mean, again, it's the same. It's with Greg Bahnsen. What did he say? Matter in motion. Jeff Durbin said stardust bumping into stardust. And now we got brain barf and brain fizzing. And it's just always like a caricatured view of materialism or physicalism, which again, like we've already seen, if you're an atheist, you don't need to be. I mean, like me personally, I'm not a physicalist. I mean, again, I might be a physicalist in some respects, but I'm very much open. I'm very much metaphysically neutral in a lot of respects, and that angers presupps because they always want to pin me down in a corner. Like, well, what's your metaphysic or what's your? And when I tell them, well, I'm not a physicalist or something, especially like when it comes to consciousness, maybe they're like, well, then what are you? Because they need to be able to put you in a corner or put you in a box so that they can say, okay, well, this is what you are, and this can't account for knowledge. So, so your worldview's refuted,
Yeah, it's like philosophy just turns into some kind of identity politics because you have to sort of you have to show your membership badge of which metaphysical club you belong to or something.
Right.
Like, I'm not interested in the arguments that you might have for whatever. And philosophers don't really care what other philosophers believe. They care what arguments they make. Right. The business of philosophy is analyzing arguments, and they're not. I mean, obviously, sometimes they come to a view about something. They just like become persuaded about a thing, and then they so and so is a realist about whatever. Of course, that sort of thing happens, but no, that's not like the primary thing. It's not an identity politics. It's not just, well, it's not like a religion or this type of religion where you belong to, Sye Ten's Baptist church or whatever, and then you can say, well, we believe in this church that Jesus, rose from the dead or something. We all share the same belief about these things. And that's like the kind of hallmarker of that type of religion, is that everyone in that congregation shares a similar set of beliefs. So they can kind of pull out their badge and show you, we all believe this thing about that. But when they're talking to just random individuals who are not religious, they get frustrated because they're like, but which congregation do you belong in? What are your beliefs? What's your worldview? Whatever. And you're like, well, dude, I don't know. I think about stuff and I change my mind, and sometimes I don't make my mind up. Right?
Metaphysics and philosophy is hard, and I'm not claiming that I have everything figured out, but
and sometimes you'd be like more certain that an argument seems interesting, or that I like this argument, this seems like plausible, but you don't really know where it goes, and you don't know like if it what it tells you about something. There are these arguments. So I like Frege's argument about they're supposed to tell you that realism is true about abstract objects. Doesn't mean I believe it. I like it. It's fun and it's interesting, and I like it compared to other arguments that I've heard. Doesn't mean I'm never going to change my mind or that I have a very high credence in that or something. But they won't take that. I have to like show my badge and be a materialist or be whatever. And that's just it's a difference between a kind of dogmatist and a non-dogmatist, I suppose.
Yeah, and they do that a lot when it comes to like the laws of logic, I feel like, because they seem to think also that if you're an atheist, you have to be like a nominalist. I guess, and a lot of them are unaware that you can be a Christian and be a nominalist. I mean, William Lane Craig is one of the most famous Christian nominalists but just for them, it's like they think, oh, if you're an atheist, you're a materialist, and you're also a nominalist, and you're a moral anti-realist, and you have to check all these boxes for them. So it's just, I don't know.
Or Peter van Inwagen is like one of the most well-respected Christian analytic philosophers. I'd say arguably the leading Christian analytic philosopher, Peter van Inwagen, fantastic philosopher. And I think he's a materialist about the mind. I think he doesn't believe that like what happens when you get physically resurrected in heaven is your actual body that gets resurrected. There's no like soul element or whatever. He's a physicalist, I think.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, so you can be a Christian and you know, a materialist when it comes to the mind-body question as well.
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, and I think for them too, the second you say materialism, they think you're pairing like materialism with naturalism. So you're saying, in a sense, the material is all that exists.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, they're just they're trying to put you in these boxes so they can refute you and refute that position and move on. So, all right. Well, shall we jump to good old Jay Dyer?
God. Yeah. Okay. I think I can do like maybe 15 minutes more.
Okay, cool. We'll survey Jay and then we'll call it a day. And that rhymed. So that was good. All right. Now, actually, this video of Jay Dyer, he was live streaming and somebody called in. And the guy who called in actually knows his philosophy pretty well, because I saw a discussion between this guy that called in. I don't know the guy's name. He actually had a discussion with Father Deacon. I think his name is Father Deacon Ananias. And he's kind of like, he's kind of over and above Jay Dyer. Like Jay goes to him a lot. But anyways, so he knows his philosophy pretty well. And I did highlight this video in my Jay Dyer video on Tag, but I think it's such a clear demonstration of how precepts like to shift the burden of proof. I think sometimes they do it a little bit more subtly, but Jay just comes right out and, I mean, just shifts it pretty egregiously. So let me see. We're starting at 307. Right there. All right.
Christianity is the net. So I like X is a necessary condition of Y therefore X, right? So Christianity is the necessary condition for the possibility of knowledge. And the way I'm getting to that is that for the quote possibility of knowledge, that would include all the transcendental categories. Because if you toss out one of them, knowledge is no longer justifiable.
Okay, so then we can kind of fill in the variables here, and it's like necessarily possibility of knowledge implies, I guess, do you want to say like Christianity or God's existence or something like that?
Well, I want it to be specific, like not just God's existence, because God's existence might be all kinds of different theisms that I don't think are compatible. And a big part of the argument is having the right metaphysic, and that includes the Trinity. So you need the essence and distinction. You need divine conceptualism.
Like this kind of orthodox. So maybe we fill in for X like this kind of orthodox Christian worldview. So necessarily the possibility of knowledge implies like the orthodox Christian worldview.
Yes.
Okay. So then I guess now that I'm like clear about what the variables are here, then the kind of original question was like, how do we motivate this?
What do you mean?
What's the argument for this premise?
Well, it's a argument about the possibility of arguing at all. So the way I argue it, it has two moves that we make. So depending upon who the argument is against, it's an impossibility to the contrary. And then the positive side of the argument is the Christian metaphysic and its claims.
I mean, you're just like not talking to anybody in particular. You're just like kind of writing.
No, the argument is always, but by the very necessity of the argument, it's an argument of comparison of paradigms. So it has to have some argument that I'm comparing against, some position, some worldview. So what's your position?
Okay, so I mean, I've never heard that. Like, depending on who the argument is against, like my argument somehow, its validity and soundness is somehow derived from who's reading the argument or from who the argument's being promulgated against. I've never heard that before in my life. And granted, this guy does end up pushing back on it, but I've never seen that before. And it boggles my mind why Jay thinks that that's like just something you can do in intellectual discourse.
Well, I mean, I think the notion of argument has, in different phases in history, been seen slightly differently on this question of whether or not basically it's a one-player game or a two-player game, right? And there are phases in history, and so a really good example of this is in the sort of medieval period. There's this stuff called the obligationes, which is kind of like a rules for formal debate. So it's quite familiar to sort of people who watch YouTube debates. It's where you get these notions of like, straw man fallacy and begging the question and stuff. But the thought is that like you have two people in a dispute, one person who asserts a proposition and the other person who like undermines or like criticizes that proposition. And then you kind of move through a series of steps. So it's sort of like logic. as we sort of think about it in terms of the mathematical stuff. But the basis of the system that we're working with presupposes that there's two people, two positions, and they're kind of like in a dialogue with each other. So it's kind of dialectical logic. But, you know, then the kind of mathematical logic is sort of stuff that happened around the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century, turned logic from being that kind of dispute between two parties, almost like a legal or the public discussion kind of thing, turned it into sort of the application of like set rules, so that you sort of state a theorem and it's move through a sequence of steps to come to a conclusion or whatever, which is clearly one person can just do that on their own. They don't need anybody else to be there. So and I think, you know, so there are like different conceptions of what it means to give an argument. So it's not quite clear that that maybe Jay is saying the type of argument that he's making is presupposing some mode of what he means by argument, which is something like that. But just to say that, you know, there are different accounts of what an argument is. But I think really what's going on with this is that because he's trying to give a transcendental argument, that this confusion goes back to these passages in Aristotle in Metaphysics Book 4, where he's trying to say that, talking about the principle of non-contradiction and how you can show that the principle is true. And he wants to say, well, you can't give a normal argument for it because principle of non-contradiction is the most certain foundational principle that there is. So if you would try and show that it was true by like showing that it followed from something else, you'd be showing that it followed from something which was less certain and less foundational than it. So you'd be getting the cart before the horse or whatever. So Aristotle doesn't want to give a sort of normal argument for it. And what he does give is kind of confusing, and scholars disagree with several passages that go on from that, but generally considered as kind of a long argument that he gives afterwards involves something like, if only you can get your opponent to say something, to like agree that something is true, right? But not in an ambiguous way, like if something, you know, where words can have two meanings, you have to like sort those things out. If they say something definite and they take a stand on something, assert that P is true or something, once they do that, then you can kind of trap them and show that they are presupposing, if you like, the law of non-contradiction. But in order to do it, you have to get your opponent to make a move. So it's kind of like wrestling, where they have to take a step towards you and then you can grab them. But the method only works if they take that step towards you. So then it's not something you can like roll out on its own. You can only sort of demonstrate it indirectly by entrapping your opponent who tries to deny it and show that they are actually saying it. So anyway, scholars disagree about exactly what Aristotle's up to there, and whether what he's doing makes any sense, and whether that's a good argument, and whether he succeeds in proving anything, and blah 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 blah, right? So I think this type of thing that Jay has in mind is sort of, at least has some kind of connection to that, the people that he reads that tell him things. I mean, he claimed to me that he'd read that bit of Aristotle.
Right.
Didn't seem to know anything about the scholarship.
Yeah.
But I think that informs quite a lot of this type of perspective. He thinks that he's got this method that works only when the opponent says something. It's like a trapping method, right? If you try and say something, I'll show you why no matter what you say, you're going to be wrong. And that will, you know, it's a crucial part of his methodology. So I guess it sounds strange if you're thinking, well, an argument is just like a mathematical logic. You can just explain the premises. You don't need another person to be there. And he has this other idea of what's going on.
Well, I guess, and his interlocutor, I think after, or maybe he already said it. I don't remember if he already said it or if he's going to say it after this, but he says like, well, suppose you do like refute my worldview. Like, how does that demonstrate your first premise? Which, I mean, I agree with, right? His first premise is basically just a way of stating the impossibility of the contrary, that the Christian worldview is necessary for the transcendentals or the preconditions of knowledge or what have you. And so even by Jay refuting this guy's worldview, that really doesn't prove the first premise whatsoever, right?
Well, yeah, for sure. If I mean, he has to be clear about what he's doing here. But if he's just saying, like, I'm going to show you that the Christian worldview is true, why think that it's true? Well, the reason to think that it's true is that your view is false. I mean, that doesn't look like an argument form that's valid, because it could be that my view is false and Christianity is false, right?
Mhm.
That seems logically consistent at the very
Right.
least. So if that's the method, why would anyone think that that was plausible? So, but I suppose the idea is it has to be something like, it's a universal thing. Just anything you say is going to be shown to be wrong, and I'll never be shown to be wrong. That's what he's trying to say. So it's like he'll demonstrate it by always beating you. So now we're back to this kind of Bahnsen, Michael Jordan analogy, where he's just like, Michael Jordan's the best basketball player, and he'll beat anybody in a one-on-one match. And you might think, well, maybe someone will come along one day that will be better than Michael Jordan, and then who would be able to beat him in a one-on-one match. But right, to find, okay, if that's what the argument is supposed to be, the best it could be is an inductive argument, because it's just trying to show that like we have ever more evidence that accumulates, that you think like, well, he's beaten everyone he's ever played against, like, or like Magnus Carlsen playing chess. You know, he had this like period where he didn't lose a game for like 100 professional games or something like that. And it's just like, I mean, maybe there is somebody out there that's better than him, but it really looks like this guy's the best chess player that there is, right? And it's an inductive case. It's not a proof, obviously, but it would be an inductive case. But I think Jay would reject that. Whatever his transcendental method is supposed to be, he doesn't want it to just be a sort of simple inductive argument.
Right.
He thinks it's some special transcendental whatever, something argument, right?
Yeah, I think so. And that's interesting. I hadn't even thought about applying the Michael Jordan analogy to what Jay's doing, because he presents it as a deductive argument, right?
But then this is like, he's given a deductive argument, but now it's like, well, what's the argument for this one premise?
Right.
And now it's an inductive argument for that premise.
Right.
But when you actually are, he will say, oh, this is about paradigms and worldviews and meta logic and all this stuff. But actually, it's just supposed to be an inductive case. And how does he show that he's better at basketball than you? It's that he interrogates you. And then we just back to the flowchart thing that all of these guys have been doing.
Yeah.
They just, you say you're a constructivist. Here are my talking points about why constructivism is bad or whatever. And then when you say, well, what's your view? And you say, oh, well, God makes it so that it all works fine. Let's move on quickly. And you're not allowed to interrogate me about how that's supposed to work, right? I'll just gesture the divine conceptualism or something, and we won't actually talk about the detail. So it's just a sort of shitly supported inductive case, right?
Well, and I know you saw, at least part of the live stream that I did on when that guy confronted him with trivialism, and he really didn't know how to handle it. And I mean, I found that really amusing, because he's used to kind of doing that, trying to put the other person's, trying to do an internal critique of the other person's worldview, but he just wasn't able to do it with the other individual who was. And again, I don't think he was actually promulgating trivialism. I think he was just, because he mentioned trivialism and dialetheism, and I think he was just showing like, these are unfalsifiable, according to your methodology of trying to, do reductio ad absurdums for your position.
Yeah, I mean, that directly goes back to Aristotle as well, because I mean, the point is Aristotle's trying to say he can show that the law of non-contradiction is true if only he gets his opponent to say something, to commit to something being true and not also being false, right? But the point is, the trivialist thinks that everything is true, every proposition, right? And every contradiction, every proposition, the negation of every proposition. So if you say, all right, do you think that, there are potatoes? The trivialist is going to go, yeah. You go, okay, great. So you don't think that that there are no potatoes? You go, no, I think there are no potatoes as well.
Yeah.
Go, hey, but you've just contradicted yourself. You go, yeah. You go, but contradictions are bad, aren't they? You go, yeah. So you shouldn't contradict yourself. You go, no, I should contradict myself, right? They're just going to agree to everything. They take a positive stance on absolutely everything. Right. The point is, if they do that, what are you doing now? The method that Aristotle wants to use doesn't work against that person, because it's sort of it's supposing that they agree with you that a contradiction is bad. But if they just agree to everything, then you can't, like, there's sort of beyond the. So even the dialetheist, the person who thinks that maybe there are some contradictions, even they think these trivialists are like beyond the pale. I think basically nobody's a trivialist. It's a kind of fictional position to take, but it undermines Aristotle's attempt to argue for the law of non-contradiction, because this person, the method doesn't work. It's like they take a step forward. Aristotle tries to grab their leg to trip them up, to go back to the wrestling analogy, and his hand just goes through the leg, because like the is sort of like empty space or something. It cannot be grappled in there by any grip or whatever. It doesn't work on them.
Yeah. I just want to say you've brought up potatoes multiple times, so I think I know what you had for dinner. No, well, cool, man. I think maybe we can end it there. We didn't get through all of them, but I think we would have been here all night, especially with the next one that I wanted to go over. It was long. It was like 8 minutes, so I don't know that we would have gotten through it. But no, man, that was cool. I had fun. I like as it's kind of like I don't know what to call it, but as much as presups like annoy the hell out of me, sometimes I can't help but just watching their videos, because it's like, what dumb shit are they gonna say next?
Yeah, hate watching.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, hate watching. So nah, man. I mean, I appreciate it. I appreciate you coming on. We'll have to do this again. We could do more presup stuff. Again, we could do it on your channel. We could do other stuff like we've talked about. But
yeah, it was fun.
Yeah. Well,
thanks for having me on.
Absolutely.